Hey guys, so this is our presentation on germline editing and ethics. Next. So my name is Spencer, and I'm going to start us off with the science basics of germline gene editing. My goal is to explain what gene editing is, what makes germline editing special and controversial, and uh, walk through a few key milestones. Next. First, gene editing means targeted changes to DNA in cells instead of just giving a medicine and hope that affects the gene. Somatic gene editing targets regular body cells, such as blood or liver cells. Those changes affect only that one person and are not passed on to the children. Germline editing targets eggs, sperm, or very early embryos. Those edits get copied to every cell in the developing person, including their own eggs or sperm later in life, so that the change can be passed on to future generations. This the tool that makes this possible are systems like CRISPR-Cas9, which can cut DNA at a chosen site, and base editors, which can switch to single DNA letters without a full cut. Next. In practice, germline editing can happen at a few stages. One approach is to edit the sperm or eggs before fertilization. Another is to edit at one cell embryo right after the sperm and egg join, or at a very early stage with only a few cells. Once the edited embryo starts dividing, all the new cells inherit the modified DNA. That means every tissue in the body that carries the change and the person's own sperm or eggs will also carry it. That is the key point. With somatic editing, the effect stops with one person. With germline editing, the changes can spread across generations, which creates a very different ethical and social questions. Next. The main argument in favor of germline editing is the chance to prevent serious genetic diseases before the child is even born. For some conditions, a single mutation is responsible, and parents know they have a high chance of having an affected child. In theory, correcting that mutation in an embryo could allow those parents to have a genetically related child without that disease. Common examples in the literature include Tay-Sachs disease, which is a fatal in early childhood, Huntington's disease, which is a dominant progressive brain disease, and sickle cell disease, where somatic gene editing has already been used in clinical trials. Supporters say that if the technology became safe and reliable, the benefits for families at high risk could be very large. Next. CRISPR-Cas9 was adapted in 2012 as a very flexible gene editing tool, which quickly changed what was possible in genetics. In 2015, researchers in China reported some of the first attempts to use CRISPR on a human embryo that were non-viable, meaning that the baby could not develop. They wanted to test feasibility and measure problems like target cuts and modification, where some cells are edited but others are not. Policy survey shows that many countries allow some germline research in the lab, but they prohibit using edited embryos to try to start a pregnancy. That is meant to keep this work in the research stage and avoid heritable changes in real children, at least for now. Next. Uh, back, sorry. In 2018, a scientist named He Jiankui in China announced that twin girls have been born after he edited their embryos to change a gene called CCR5, trying to make them resistant to HIV. These were real pregnancies in real children, so that if the first reported case of heritable germline and genome editing. Later analysis showed that the major problems with consistent and scientific design and oversight, and it was not even clear that the edits worked as intended. He Janku lost his position and was sent to prison. This case shocked the scientific community and led to strong calls for clearer and stricter global rules on germline editing. It is a good it is a good transition to the next part of the presentation, which will focus on the legal and regulatory slides. Next. To wrap up my section, there are four take-home main points. First, germline editing means changing the DNA in eggs, sperm, or early embryos, so the edit is passed to all the cells in future generations. Second, with tools like CRISPR-Cas9 and base editors, germline editing is technically possible, but it is the humans that is still, but in humans, it is still unsafe and highly experimental. Third, the main promise benefits is preventing serious single gene disease before a child is even born. Fourth, the CRISPR baby case in the real world is a real world example of what could happen when one researcher acts without proper oversight. This is why many groups now favor for a stronger, clearer global rules. Now I'll hand it over to the next person that will explain the legal and regulatory landscape.
Okay. So I'll be covering so my name is Wahagan, and I'll be covering the legal and the professional framework on germline gene editing. My goal is to show how countries can regulate this technology, what major organizations recommend, and how events such as the CRISPR baby case have shaped the current policies on germline gene editing. So currently, the germline gene editing is not permitted for creating a child. It is only for research purposes, um, for potential treatments and therapies. Specifically in the US, the federal budget rule does not allow FDA to even consider for applications in germline gene editing, which does shut down any clinical use. Many countries do allow research in vitro, but this is strictly regulated, and these countries do maintain a firm ban on uh, implementing edited embryos. This is pretty standard, even in countries that have advanced gene programs. Um, Even because one of the main reasons why germline gene editing is banned globally is because of the scientific uncertainty around the long-term safety of it. Even a small change in the germline can lead to unexpected effects later on in life, or it can even affect the future generations. And then these risks are just impossible to fully predict. Because edited traits can be passed on down generations, governments, do take this seriously. They just don't want to avoid unintended harm. For example, the United Kingdom allows germline editing for research, only under strict licensing through human fertilization and embryology authority. But again, they emphasize that using edited embryos is completely prohibited. In addition to having national laws, we have international organizations that also implement their own restrictions on germline gene editing. For example, the World Health Organization is strictly against germline editing when it comes to clinical usage. They also believe that no country currently has the regulatory frameworks needed to monitor long-term outcomes. In 2023, the Council of Europe issued concerns on germline editing. They also released specific guidelines noting how editing the human germline is just ethically wrong. In addition, there is the Oviedo Convention in Spain, which is a human rights treaty explicitly prohibiting genetic modifications that can be passed on to future generations. This also emphasizes on the ethical concerns about consent, fairness, and long-term impact on individuals who cannot choose their inherited genetic, changes. For professional and scientific, organizations, we have organizations that play an important role in shaping the germline genome editing policies. And in the year 2023, we have Internation Genome Editing Summit that concluded that there's still not enough evidence to support safety and reliability to allow clinical use of the heritable genome editing. The International Commission on the Clinical Use of the Human Germline Gene Editing in the year 2020 defined strict conditions or guidelines that would need to be met before any clinical applications could proceed. These professional guidelines emphasize the importance of being open, clear about research methods and results, carefully tracking, over time and only using it on patients that have serious genetic diseases when no other treatments are available. Despite having these professional recommendations, it is still very challenging to establish global governance. We have different countries that have different political systems, they have different cultural values and scientific capacities, which is why it is difficult to create a universal standard. Experts still continue to debate how heritable genome editing should be managed. Some experts call for a long-term pause, until global agreement should be managed, until global agreement is reached, while others support more of a careful, step-by-step approach that will allow controlled research to continue. This favors more of a flexible oversight, making sure that work stays safe and transparent and ethically responsible while allowing scientific knowledge to grow. So to see why these professional guidelines and the governance challenges matter, we have the Jianghu CRISPR baby case, which in 2018, a Chinese scientist named Jianghu, I'm probably pronouncing this wrong. He edited the CCR5 gene in human embryos of twin girls, attempting to make them resistant to HIV. He misled the parents about the risks and the benefits, and this directly violated the established scientific and ethical standards that we have today. Although the children were reportedly born healthy, the long-term effects are unknown, which does raise serious safety concerns. The global scientific community, strongly condemned his actions. They said that it was unsafe, unnecessary, and irresponsible. Jianghu was sentenced to 3 years in prison, which also led to stricter regulations in China. In recent developments, we have major scientific organizations such as the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy. We have the International Society for Cell and Gene Therapy, the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, and they collectively agreed on renewing their previous agreement on the 10-year moratorium of human genome editing. Their concern includes unresolved safety risks, lack of urgent medical need, and potential social harm, such as inequality or discrimination. These organizations emphasize on regulations that must be enforceable and coordinated across different countries. The Hejanku case serves as a perfect example of the importance of both ethical standards and global regulatory system. Next, cover the opposing ethical viewpoints of germline editing.
Hi everyone, my name is Tafe and I'll be going over opposing ethical viewpoints on germline editing. Next. Some people believe that germline editing can prevent severe suffering and improve public health, while others raise concerns about ethical risk, discrimination, and future unknown consequences. We will go over justice and equity implications and how ethical principles relate to opposing ethical viewpoints. Next. People who are in support of germline editing argue that it could prevent genetic diseases such as cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs, or Huntington's disease. It also respects reproductive autonomy by giving parents the freedom to choose to prevent genetic diseases for their future children. Germline editing can be beneficial on a public health scale by reducing the incidence of genetic diseases. It could decrease long-term healthcare burden and improve population outcomes. Next. People who are against germline editing argue that if germline editing is allowed for medical purposes, it could expand to designer baby, or that would be editing for non-medical traits such as intelligence, appearance, or strength. There are also concerns about eugenics and societal pressure to eliminate certain disabilities rather than supporting people living with them. They also worry that this could create a negative message that individuals with disabilities are less valuable and can lead to reducing their rights. Additionally, future generations cannot consent to genetic alterations made on their behalf, and we still don't know the long-term biological effects of germline editing. Next. Justice require fairness and equal access to beneficial treatments. If germline editing becomes available to only wealthy or privileged population, this can lead to unequal society divided by genetic advantage. So this could lead to concerns that socioeconomic and racial health disparities could become worse. Ethical implementations would require policies addressing insurance coverage, affordability, and equitable access. Next. In the medical ethical principles, autonomy support parents' rights to make reproductive decisions, benefits and supports preventing diseases and suffering. However, non-maleficence raises concerns about unknown risk passed to future generations, and justice questions whether access to germline editing would be fair and whether underprivileged population would be harmed or excluded. These principles conflict in this topic, showing how germline editing is such a complex ethical issue. So just because we can change the human genome, should we really change it? With those considerations in mind, in the next section, we will see how these issues fit into the real world.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hira Ali, and my role in this presentation is to discuss the impact of germline editing on patients, healthcare delivery, and PA practice. I'll be covering how this technology affects individuals and families, how it shapes clinical systems, and what it means for future physician assistants. These considerations help us understand the broader implications of germline editing beyond the science itself. Okay, so for the first slide, we will talk about impact on patients. The ability to edit germline cells enables scientists to stop genetic diseases from developing in unborn children. The technology enables families who carry severe genetic disorders like cystic fibrosis and Huntington's disease and hereditary cancers to stop the transmission of these diseases. The psychological benefits of this technology create new possibilities for families because they previously faced only dangerous situations with unpredictable outcomes. Families see germline editing as their chance to end the ongoing family tradition of inherited diseases, which have affected their ancestors for generations. Scientists encounter various complicated emotional and moral obstacles when people attempt to use genetic editing technology. Parents face social and personal stress to choose genetic editing because they want to give their children the most advantageous health results. The process of making decisions about germline editing becomes extremely difficult because scientists have not established reliable long-term safety records for this technology. Parents fear that their child might develop unexpected DNA alterations, which could happen during their lifetime or appear in their descendants because scientists do not understand the dangers of germline editing. The heritable nature of these modifications creates a situation where any adverse effects will spread throughout multiple generations of a family tree, thus requiring unborn children to give their consent. The availability of germline editing technology faces two major obstacles, which stem from unequal access to this treatment. The high cost of germline editing procedures will block most families from accessing the treatment because only wealthy families can afford to visit specialized reproductive medicine facilities. The expensive nature of germline editing technology generates moral conflicts because it threatens to establish medical treatment disparities between rich and poor communities. The practice of designing babies through genetic modification, creates new ethical dilemmas because scientists must determine if germline editing should only treat medical conditions or if it should also be used to modify non-medical traits, including height and intelligence and physical characteristics. The situation demands both patient-focused direction and ethical evaluation to address these matters. Okay, the next slide. Next, we will talk about impact on healthcare delivery. Healthcare systems need new clinical criteria, guidelines, and oversight to determine when germline editing should be used in medicine. Because changes to the germline are permanent and can be passed down, they require stricter safety, quality, and ethical standards. Reproductive hospitals and clinics need to set strong standards for their labs, clarify who can be a patient, and implement longer term monitoring to assess how well treatments work. Healthcare providers, geneticists, ethicists, and politicians must work together to establish patient-centered frameworks that prioritize safety and openness. The growing need for genetic counseling underscores the need for additional experts in this field. Patients considering germline editing need to understand complex biological processes. Potential editing needed to understand complex biological processes, potential future risks, and ethical concerns. This counseling extends beyond standard pre-procedure instructions and requires input from experts in reproductive medicine, mental health, ethics, and law. Ethical review boards must carefully evaluate situations to ensure they comply with rules that balance medical benefits and moral considerations. Healthcare organizations will face significant financial and operational challenges with the introduction of germline editing. Due to high costs, insurance coverage is likely to be limited, making it difficult for most patients to access care. Providers will need to adapt their procedure to incorporate gene editing technologies, increased embryo screening, and multi-general tracking methods. Integrating germline editing into healthcare will profoundly impact reproductive and genetic medicine, demanding ongoing assessment and adjustments. Next slide. Impact on PA practice. Physician assistants must acquire new clinical competencies because germline editing requires them to demonstrate advanced knowledge and training and ethical expertise. Healthcare professionals need to acquire knowledge about genetics and gene editing technology and reproductive medicine, ethical principles because genomic medicine continues to gain significance in medical practice. PA education programs will expand their curriculum to include genomics and bioethics and genetic counseling training because practitioners need this knowledge to make decisions about germline editing and to discuss these topics with their patients. Patient education and shared decision-making practices will become vital for PAs to assist people and their families during their difficult decision-making process. The ability of PAs to communicate effectively with patients will make them indispensable for explaining genetic risks and technological boundaries to patients who need help making decisions. The process of patient education includes explaining genetic test results and presenting treatment options, and handling cultural and religious concerns and confirming patient comprehension of germline editing risks and benefits. The healthcare team, consisting of geneticists and reproductive specialists and ethicists, as well as mental health providers, will work closely with PAs. PAs must acquire patient advocacy competencies during the development of risk management skills. The process of germline editing for future generations creates special challenges regarding patient consent documentation and information exchange. PAs need to execute all procedures according to established protocols while documenting everything thoroughly and making sure that patients receive complete information about the procedure. PAs can work to promote fair genetic knowledge, genetic PAs can work to promote fair genetic technology availability, which protects disadvantaged groups from discrimination. PAs need to create patient-centered ethical standards for safe practice because germline editing will enter clinical practice. And these are our slides for the references.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.